We will be doing a review of what our transition plan will be on getting the interRAI into Insight. We will be reviewing why this tool is so important, and then we'll be showing you the tool itself and kind of walking through the content. And then we will be showing you the future trainings that we have and what our goals are with that as well. So with the transition plan, on July 5th, the interRAI Home Care Assessment tool will be accessible in Insight. The interRAI will be replacing our current eScreen, level of service, and the ACCM. Rowing is currently working on these details, and instructions will be distributed in the near future. Be assured, in using your current Insight ID, you will be able to access the interRAI Home Care tool. Next slide. Okay, the program requirements, including the nursing facility level of care definition and outcomes, will remain the same. How the information is collected and recorded from your assessment will be what's different. The interRAI Home Care tool will empower a clinical case management assessment process that is focused first on supported systemic person-centered approach and less on the funding and eligibility components.
Pause for just a moment because I've got some note that they can't hear.
We're getting in the live chat that some of you don't have sound, so we're going to just pause for a minute and see what we can do on our end. We're being asked to make sure that you all have speakers or headphones.
This is Ted Williams, Technical Advisor. It appears that only a couple of people, we have nearly 100 people online, and it appears that only a couple of people are not getting audio. This is voice over internet protocol, so you do need headphones or speakers to listen to it. So make sure you have those on and plugged in and that your volume is up. So sorry for the 2 people that are having issues.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, next slide, please. So the interRAI has 2 assessment components. The home care tool is what we will be reviewing today and will be rolled out on 7/5. The clinical assessment protocols, also known as CAPs, are triggered through the home care tool. The CAPs are an integral part of the assessment in addressing the goals of care relating to the individual's functioning, health, social support, service use, and quality of life. These will be rolled out with CAMS in 2017 with more training opportunities in the future. In Insight, if a CAP is triggered by the tool, you will receive a prompt under construction. Next slide, please. So why does interRAI matter? The interRAI tool is designed to be reliable, person-centered, that informs and guides a comprehensible assessment that will result in accurate, consistent, and quality care planning within the individual's choice of community-based setting. The accuracy from this assessment will provide a quality evidence-based health and social outcomes for the individual, maximize the individual's functioning capacity and quality of life through person-centered planning, addressing health outcomes and problems, and to ensure the individual is able to remain in their home for as long as possible. So purple unicorns can creep up at any time during your person-centered assessment. As you are all aware, person-centered is not about giving individuals whatever they want, and this is what we refer to as the purple unicorn. What the interRAI assessment tool will do is promote a person-centered practice to systematically empower you, the case manager, to navigate, discover, and explore why that purple unicorn is important to the individual. The reality is that our funding sources will not be able to address all problem areas, and are not to be marketed as a menu of service. The interRAI assessment will be our first systemic tool to shift our focus more on the individual and less on funding streams and eligibility, with a goal to maximize community resources and informal supports. So here's how the eScreen and interRAI measure up. As you can see, the eScreen promotes eligibility, funding streams, and leaves too much room for inaccurate and inconsistent recordings for quality social and health outcomes. The interRAI is based on a holistic clinical assessment that is driven by key person-centered principles that include strengths, preferences, needs, desired outcomes, and goals, which will then correlate to service matching, and then lastly into funding streams. So these are the 20 sections of the interRAI. It is important for us to note that not all of these sections will be completed at every assessment type. For example, the full tool will be required on every initial and annual, and for the quarter and 180 days, there will be an interRAI short form that will be completed. Now, from a first glance, this probably looks pretty overwhelming.
You should have seen some. Well, there are several sections that we're already gathering in our current tools, but you can see some of these you may have been collecting before, but there wasn't a good place to put them or document them in our system. So this tool gives you that opportunity to collect that consistently.
And also with this tool, it's important to note that the design of the flow of this interRAI is supposed to be in a logical sequence and completed in order which they appear on the tool. But as you all know from your own case management experience, that every assessment will be different as every individual is unique. So this sequence of the assessment is probably going to be more of a guide. And I think it's safe to say that in working with people, in trying to get into this logical sequence, it's just going to be really hard to follow this to a T, especially since it's also really dependent upon that individual at that moment and what's important to them and what's going on, which that is a basic principle of person-centered and starting where the individual is. So this is the first section of the interRAI tool. This is section A, and it collects the identification information. So the following data will be housed here, and that's going to be more of the demographic information, the reason for the assessment, the date of the assessment, living arrangements, and the time since last hospital stays are collected here. What's kind of new in this section to all of us would be in section A10, which is going to be at the top right part of this form. It's in a text field box. And this is the person's expressed goals of care. And the documentation will describe outcomes that the individual hopes to achieve as a result of receiving community resources, informal supports, private pay options, and or all types of funded services. Okay. Section B, this contains your intake and initial history information. So what's being collected here is going to be the date that the case opened, ethnicity and race, primary language, and residential history over the last 5 years. This section will only need to be completed during the initial assessment, as it provides basic information about the person that is not expected to be changed during the person's involvement with the service plan. Okay, this is section C, and this is on cognition. Usually this information is buried in case notes and or eScreen narrative. Now there is a place to capture accurate cognitive abilities for the individual and to lessen your narrative, and our goal is to reduce the request for information around this section. So what's being captured here is in section C1, that's your cognitive skills for daily decision making, which the purpose of this section is to record the person's actual performance in making everyday decisions. Section C2 is memory recall ability, and this is assessing the person's ability to remember recent and past events. Section C3 is the periodic disordered thinking or awareness, which is recording behavioral signs that may indicate anything relating to delirium. Section D, this is focusing on communication and vision. Again, we believe that most of you are already capturing this, and again, it's just buried in some kind of a narrative section. But this section contains making self-understood and ability to understand others. This intent is to document the person's ability to express or communicate their requests, needs, opinions, and urgent problems, and to engage in social conversation. Sections D3 and D4 is focused on hearing and vision, and this will describe the person's ability to comprehend verbal information, whether it's communicated to the person orally, in a written form, through sign language, or braille. Section E, this is on mood and behavior. What's being captured here are indicators for possible depression, anxiousness, or sad mood. It's collecting a self-report on that individual's mood at the time, and also behavioral symptoms. Mood distress is a serious condition and is associated with significant morbidity. Increased mood distress is often underdiagnosed and undertreated in community settings. Your assessment may serve as a crucial first opportunity to identify whether such problems are present. As most, and we're having some technical difficulty with our PowerPoint. Sorry. We're just going to take a quick pause until we figure that out. We apologize.
Ted, I hit a button. Something happened. Yes.
Are you trying to do something different?
No. Just went away. Okay, there we go. Thank you.
Thanks for bearing with us, everybody.
Yeah, sorry about that. Let's go ahead and go to section F.
Okay.
So with section F, this is going to contain components of a clinical psychosocial well-being. We recognize, again, that several of you are already gathering this information and recorded in a narrative somewhere in Insight. But now there's a place, again, to consistently collect this important information, and hopefully this will reduce your narrative. The purpose of this psychosocial section is to document and describe the individual's interaction patterns and adaptation to their social environment. For example, what's captured here would be that individual's social relationships, anything dealing with their loneliness, change in social activities, length of time they're alone during the day, and if they have any major stressors occurring in their life. Okay, section E. I apologize. Section G is going to be related more to the IADLs and ADLs that we're very familiar with from our Section 2A e-screen. So with this, we had to put this on 2 slides. So on the first section on G1, this is focusing on the IADLs, which interRAI defines the purpose of this section to examine the areas of function that are most commonly associated with the following. So it could be meal preparations, ordinary housework, managing finances, how they manage medications, how they're able to use the phone. Stairs are on here, so they're taking into consideration on the person's sort of mobility of going up and down steps. And honestly, this is a new section for all of us, and we're going to have to dive a little bit deeper in this on how this kind of fits, because right now it's kind of unknown. The shopping and transportation are also collected here. And in this section, capacity is what's being assessed based on the individual's presumed ability to carry out the activity. And this is not new because I think we are all capturing this currently in our documentation. Next slide. And this is the G2 section, and this is going to cover all the ADL performance. And when we start looking at this tool, originally we loved this section because it really gave a robust list as far as looking at the individuals, how they're able to perform their self-care, but also their level of assistance that they might require to complete that. So with that, this is more of an expanded list that entails the bathing, the personal hygiene is now included, dressing upper body, dressing the lower body, walking, locomotion, transferring on the toilet use, bed mobility, and eating. We do anticipate with this section a significant reduction with the RFIs because, like I said earlier, it seems like we still run into a lot of trying to get a description based on that individual's self-performance, but also that level of assistance that they might require in performing their self-care. So section H is all about continence, and this is really expanded. So it's determining and recording the person's pattern of bladder and bowel continence. And it's looking at the bladder, urinary collection devices, bowel continence, and if they have to depend on pads or briefs. Section I is capturing the disease diagnosis that evaluates the presence of conditions associated with the type and level of care needed by the individual. This includes diseases or infections relevant to the individual's current ADL status, cognitive status, mood or behavior status, medical treatments, nursing monitoring, or risk of death. And what's being captured here, what's important to note is it's all current information. So like in the narrative, we might see a person has a lot of historical medical conditions, like they had 3 years ago they had cancer or they had surgeries. That won't be collected on this tool, but it might be in a case note, but this is only looking, I think, at a 3-day flashback period.
And what's impacting their functioning during that time. So if it's that they had their appendix removed 6 years ago, that's likely not impacting their functioning now, so it wouldn't need to be recorded.
Okay, section J, this is a pretty beefy section, so we had to put it on 2 slides. But in what's being displayed right now, what's being displayed is that it's a comprehensive set of conditions to accurately measure the individual's difficulty. In this slide, it's showing the falls, its problems with balance, cardiac, psychiatric, neurological, GI status, shortness of breath, fatigue, and pain symptoms. And then on this slide, you can see that it's going into sleep patterns, instability of conditions, tobacco use, potential for improvement, risk of decline. So the reason why this is kind of a hodgepodge is because in keeping in mind that the purpose of the entire assessment tool is to be used in a logical sequence. So that means that each section should be building upon the other to show an interconnectedness of how medical and or social events can impact that individual's quality of life. These conditions and or behaviors could be represented in this section. So these conditions could be a result from diagnoses or the medications they take to treat diagnoses. So for example, if a person that has frequent falls, it may be due to all the medications that's having some kind of effect on them. Or if an individual is using alcohol, it could be that they're self-medicating to deal with their recent or continuing health or social changes in their life. So this section can be pretty significant to further explore the why, the what, and the how to better understand that individual situation, which can lead the case manager to a better evaluation of clinical interventions. So section K, this is going to focus on being a focus on oral and nutritional status. Currently, you are assessing some of this information to determine the G-tube needs. This section will enhance your assessment by being a little bit more accurate with this information. So what's being captured here is that person's height, weight, looking at their nutritional issues relating to weight loss, fluid retention or intake, their mode of nutritional intake, and if there's any dental or oral issues. And on a side note, the nutritional risk score will continue to be captured in the person-centered monitoring tool to supplement this information as well. So section L is pertaining to skin conditions. So the intent here is to determine the condition of the person's skin, to identify the presence and stage of ulcers, to document other skin conditions, and note any foot problems that might be present. Again, we know that a lot of you are already capturing this in a narrative in some form. However, this interRAI will promote accurate details about skin conditions. And this robust list will include not only pressure ulcers, but also looking at past ulcers, any kind of skin problems that they're having, tears and cuts on the skin, changes in the skin condition, and anything relating to any foot problems. So section M is on medications. And this houses a single listing of all prescribed and non-prescribed medications. You are currently entering this in the ACCM. The only difference here is that it doesn't have a recording for physician on who that physician is describing. So right now you might have to capture that in a case note. And we're looking at probably changing that in the future. Okay, next. So section N is on treatments and procedures. So to kind of break this down, in section N1, it's focusing on prevention, and it's capturing whether a person has unmet needs for health counseling and preventative care. Section N2 is focusing on treatments and programs, and it's received or scheduled in the last 3 days, and it can be examples of chemo, radiation, dialysis, suctioning, transfusions, wound care. And with this section, what in process is that I think we all kind of wrestle with how to fit those items into our current e-screen. And now this section will allow us to record this information consistently and accurately. Section N3 captures the number of minutes spent by formal caregivers in providing care or care management in the past week. We kind of expect this section will be integrated in some capacity with the care planning development phases. Section N4 is looking at hospital use, emergency room use, and physician visits in the last 90 days, just kind of like what you're already capturing in the ACCM. And Section 5 is pertaining to physically restraints. Section O, now we just have a cleaner place to track if the person has a legal guardian. Section P is capturing social supports, and this is focused to assess the person's informal caregiver support. And this is different from, of course, the formal relationships, such as with the home care agencies. The information collected here includes informal helper details, such as what the relationship is to the individual, and also looking at their ability and what they're able to help with that personal self-care. Section Q is on environmental assessments. This section is looking at environmental hazards and if the setting is uninhabitable, rental properties, how accessible they are on the outside of the parameter, looking at available resources and possibly finances. This assessment looks like it's just going to help in that overall health and safety of that individuals and in their environment. This will not be replacing the RFAs, but it may have a part with the RFA request in the future. Okay. Section R, this is titled Discharge Potential and Overall Status. Granted, we are going to be working on see if we can change the word discharge to termination to be more in line with our current business rules on with our termination procedures. But in this section, it's looking at that potential. It's gathering all the information up to this point and looking at that individual's overall, kind of giving you that overall picture on if they're progressing, are they declining. It's going to collect the goals, if the goals are being met, their overall self-sufficiency, and measuring prior and current ADLs. Section S is actually, it's again titled discharge, but we're going to be requesting this to be changed to termination. And this section is actually going to complement our current DEW and termination procedures. So if the person needs to come off the program for whatever reason, this is just going to capture some information as far as the last date, kind of looking at what is their residence at the time of termination. And then the assessment information, which is section T, this is going to capture signatures of the person coordinating, so that would be the case manager, and the date in which the assessment was completed.
I was just going to comment, there's a question that was just asked about environmental safety extending to HCBS workers and the case manager. And I need some elaboration on that question, I think. The assessment tool is about the person. It's a personal assessment of the participant. But I'm not sure if that's what you're asking in the question or if it's something bigger about safety issues for people entering the home. So if you can put something more in, that would help.
We are very sensitive and realistic in knowing that this will take some time for all of us to learn and absorb this new assessment tool. For added expert support, we are now consulting with Relias, and they will be offering in the upcoming months a blended training mechanism from a direct face-to-face training components, and also they'll be helping us with some more webinars. And from this slide, you can see that we, the Division of Aging, will be hosting 4 more webinar training segments. And what you can expect from each of these segments, you can see that we've broken this down now. We're going to be going more into like different sections and grouping them. And we're going to be kind of diving more intimately into each section, reviewing the intent, looking at it from a person-centered facilitation approach. And then we will start defining nursing facility level of care in each of these sections that we have mapped into this tool. So we will also be in process of developing trainings to involve the super user group for both the area agencies on aging and our independent care management networks. Once we get this information finalized, we will get this emailed out to all of you. And again, like I said, this presentation is being recorded, and all the questions that you've asked, we will get some responses associated with that, and we'll have all this posted on the DA webpage. And again, we'll let our area agency on aging's waiver liaisons and independent case management entities know when we have that posted. Do we have time for a few questions, maybe?
Yeah, I've tried to answer some of the, this is Debbie, by the way. I've tried to answer a few of the questions as they've come up. We got some expansion on the environmental safety question, that when the consumer has weapons or makes I think this is intimidating kind of remarks to the HCBS worker or the case manager acting in an aggressive or demeaning manner. Those are certainly areas of concern, but I'm not sure they're going to come up in the personal assessment tool around environmental safety issues. You might see those surface in the mood and behavior section with possible behavior challenges there. So I don't want to downplay that those aren't important things. They just aren't going to get documented in the person's personal assessment per se. It's going to be more case notes and sounds like incident reports would be where that would come into play. Let me go back. There's another one about reports that will be available. Yes, of course, we'll have lots of reports, and that is one of the huge advantages of the interRAI tool, is that it's much less reliant on narrative. And so there's more fields and responses that are actually things we can report data on rather than everything being in that narrative field that's then not very accessible for reports. Related to that, we have a question about a narrative section of the assessment. There will continue to be a narrative field, 2 narrative fields that are very much like the general client comment section and the preliminary care plan comment section of the eScreen, but the extent of that narrative will be greatly reduced. If you think about it now, you spend a lot of time in those narratives giving the care management consultant on this end more detailed information about the level of intervention and support the person requires, because that's one of the challenges of the eScreen. If you need assistance with bathing, whether it's queuing because you have dementia and you're otherwise physically completely able to complete the task, or you're bedbound total assist for bathing, you get a yes. And so we need a whole lot of extra narrative to help us figure out where you actually are on that spectrum. The interRAI is much more specific in how you record that level of assistance, and so we anticipate the level of narrative you have to offer will go way down, but there will still be some element of narrative, again, so we can get a sense of the person. As we've said in trainings before, you have to remember, for the care management consultants, this is all they see and all they know, and so they need a little bit of narrative, a little bit of story, if you will, so that we can get to know the person a little bit and not have it all be just check boxes. So hopefully that helps, and there will be training then provided on what should be in that narrative field and what we'll look for. And I think that kind of answers the next question on the narrative. Do you want to chime in, Amy?
I don't know. I'm looking up above. It looks like there was stuff on initial assessments, but I'm not sure.
I've answered those as we went through. Yep.
Sorry.
Yeah, I tried to keep up here until the end when the questions got a little longer. So yes, we'll provide information on what goes in the narrative field. There's a question about evaluating D-cubes and etc. That's not new to the interRAI. We've always had that issue with the eScreen, where we require some information on that is maybe not in your training and background to provide, but we've always referred people to, often when there's D-cubes involved, the person's already receiving PA services, and so very often the home health agency has notes from their nursing staff that will give you all the information you ever wanted about those D-cubes and probably more. So I don't think that's particular to the interRAI, but it's a long-standing issue where you can use nursing notes. Good point. Somebody made a comment that this looks very similar to the MDS. It absolutely does, and that again was another selling feature for us. Really, it helps us to have reporting where we can compare our home and community-based service population to the nursing facility population. That can be a huge help. As we talk about rebalancing projects and efforts to shift care into home and community-based settings, I often hear the Nursing Facility Association folks think that their people are more impaired and need higher levels of care in the nursing facility than what people in home and community-based programs have. And in fact, I've seen them present client profiles, resident profiles, And when I read them, I see waiver clients. They're absolutely the same as the people we're serving at home, but we don't have nearly the level of specificity in our data to prove that and to really show that. And we will have with the interRAI, particularly since so many of the elements do align with features on the MDS. Yes, Laura's a little concerned the last scheduled training is June 28th, and this tool is to begin July 1st. Technically, on the HCBS side, we won't expect you to start using this until after the 4th weekend, so it'll be July 5th. But I would want to emphasize that June 28th is not the last training. This isn't a quick train and done and then go forth and use the tool. We'll be doing a lot more webinars and reinforcement training even after July 1st as everyone kind of works together to learn to use this tool. So we'll have done enough before July 1st that you'll just have the mechanics of it. We'll also have some particular training on exactly how it gets implemented in InSight. There'll be some video trainings put together on how to complete the interRAI in that application. So there's a whole lot more than that coming, and it will go well beyond July 1st as we all jump in. There was an earlier question about whether everybody would do an initial assessment after July 1st. No, you won't. You'll slide into this. It's not like you have to rush out and do interRAIs on all your people July 5th. It'll just be the next time they come due for a level of care, that's when you'll do the interRAI. If that level of care is an annual, then you're going to do the long form, the complete tool. If that level of care is one of your 180-day quarterly kind of level of care determinations, semi-annuals, you'll do the short form version, which is a much smaller subset of these questions, but gets us enough information that we can map to all the appropriate e-screen fields to get a level of care determination. So it's not like everybody's going to run out and do interRAIs right away on July 5th. It will kind of ease in to your routine, and we'll continue to do training and reinforcement around that. There's a question about how the interRAI and the 90-day monitoring tool interface. There is some overlap there, and we're looking at ways of making that connection stronger, but I think most of that will happen later as we roll into the CAM system. We're just limited in some of those capabilities with InSight. There's a question about asking for hourly schedule in the comment section of the e-screen. Is there a section for that schedule on the interRAI? Actually, there are some places that potentially make that better on the interRAI. Let me go back somewhere here. Somebody here knows the section I'm headed to. That where they do the time, the.
Oh, that was like the.
It's in G, isn't it?
I think it's in J.
We'll get there in a second. Maybe we don't have a slide that actually shows that. They're going to find it, but in a second there's a slide where you estimate the hours of week in. Thank you. Let's go back to that. Here you go. So on N3, it outlines the formal care. The person receives the number of days and the minutes in the last week. In many cases, this will be adequate for an hourly schedule. In other cases, it won't. I mean, it's the same as today. It depends on the circumstances, the amount of time you're asking for, and whether that time makes sense in relation to the needs that you've documented in the assessment. That's the only time we ask for an hourly schedule now. It's not a given that you always have to do an hourly schedule. But if the hours being requested don't seem to match with the needs that are documented, we'll continue to ask for additional information the same as we do now. But this will be a place where, you know, some of that detailed information that you now have to type out will be in a field that's much more reportable. And we do recognize that we will have to add attendant care to that list. That's a gap that we have there. appears the medication level of assistance was being addressed in the IADL section, but not in section 2A. Yeah, those are all, we've mapped those, but and we'll share with folks the mapping to the e-screen elements. But frankly, as case managers and assessors in the field, you don't need to worry about that. We've mapped them, and we can share that crosswalk. The system will have that all programmed into it. What you need to worry about is doing a complete and accurate assessment, answering all the questions appropriately and accurately, and then the system will tell you whether you have 3 checks or not. So that people are really more focused on engaging with the participant in a true person-centered assessment process, getting all the information, and not worrying about that eligibility piece as the focus of your assessment. Do we need to know if they're eligible? Yes, but we don't need you focused on that while you're having the conversation with the individual and trying to get all the appropriate assessment information. So yeah, the medication piece actually comes from a couple different places. Almost all of the e-screen elements came from more than one response on the interRAI. It was a one-to-many kind of thing. Again, because there is so much more specificity in the interRAI than there is on the e-screen. There's a question about training hours. We'll send something out to address overall where these hours count in terms of training, but yes, they'll contribute to the training hours that you're required to have. And there's a question from Laura about, will it be entered via a portal on the web and we'll pull back into the system? Yeah, that's pretty much how it will happen. We think it will be, they're starting development on it right now, so we'll know more in a couple of weeks, but what we're told is that they can do that in a very seamless way. And so you'll basically act very much like you normally do in Insight and go to that e-screen tab, only instead of doing an e-screen, there'll be a button that you'll click that will push you out to the web, to the portal where you can complete the interRAI tool, and then it'll go right back into Insight when you finalize it. So we think it'll be seamless and it won't require a second log on. Can we share PDFs? Yes, we can. We'll try to get, there's actually already posted PDFs on the Ascend website and on the DA PassR website if you want to get them from there. But we'll post some on the case management page too. But we already have some up as part of the PassR redesign process. So let me just, there's I think some other questions I see people typing. So if I can just stall for a few minutes, I'm going to go back because I think this is a really great table early on here of the e-screen versus the interRAI. And so I just want to be sure, you know, everybody understands that the reasoning of why we're switching tools at all and why we in particular picked the interRAI home care tool. And we've hit upon some of them already just with the degree of specificity, the similarity to the MDS, but moving away from that focus on eligibility and just focusing on assessing the needs of the person. For those of you participating in the choice pilot, you know that we already really tried to do that with the choice pilot assessment tool, moved in a very similar direction. Those of you using the choice pilot assessment, I think probably see lots of similarities between that assessment tool and the interRAI. And by the way, that will go away too. I mean, we'll replace everything with the interRAI. But I think you'll see a lot of similarity there, where the e-screen has been reliant on narrative and really lacked clear definitions of how to fill things out. The interRAI will be much more specific, much more reportable. It allows us to measure risk and outcomes in a way that the e-screen just doesn't even get close to. The fact that we can eliminate not just the e-screen, but also all the level of service assessments and the vast majority of the ACCM information means that even though it's a longer tool, it's a single tool, it's all in one place. It's a one assessment and done kind of thing. the fact that the eScreen is just a homegrown tool that, frankly, we've not been able to recover much of its history. Somebody somewhere 20, 30 years ago created it. It's not evidence-based. It doesn't have a lot of validity in that sense, where the interRAI is tested, studied, research is done from its data. It is evidence-based, and later on, as we get to the fall and you start to see how the risk assessment scores and the clinical assessment protocols come into play, you really see the potential of this tool in moving us much farther along in person-centered planning and needs-based assessments. So you'll get a chance to spend several months just learning the assessment tool and really mastering, we hope, that piece before you have to worry about the CAPS and the risk assessment piece that we won't implement until we move into CAMS. So I did want to come back and really hit on this screen so that folks understand why this was important to do. It's a big bite to change this level of care tool that we've had for so long, but the interRAI really addresses many of the complaints that you and all of us have had about the eScreen for a long time, and gives us just what we think is a much, much better tool. So let me go back and see if a couple people got their questions in here. Oh, somebody asked about the PDF being printed. You will run into that with some versions of the PDF on the long form. The short form you should have no problem with. It should print fine. On the long form, that is still a copyrighted document from interRAI, and so you can pull up the PDF and look at it, but if you try to print it, it will not print at this time. We're working to get our hands on a uncopyrighted version of it so that you will be able to print that out, but right now it still has the protection on it. There was a question about a place to mark illegal drug use. I don't know that there. I think that probably comes in as a CAP process. Mm-hmm. Maybe in the mood and behavior section, there is the drug or the tobacco and drug use section in section J, where some of that can come into play. There's a question about how this delineates funding sources. I'm glad you asked that question, because again, kind of the whole thing that we want to get away from is that emphasis on eligibility while we're doing the assessment. And so there isn't a lot of talk here about funding sources. It's all about just assessing, doing a needs-based, person-centered assessment of the individual, and then we'll worry about the funding sources a little down the road. And I know that sounds like crazy talk because our world is so eligibility focused, and you need to know who's going to pay for what and when and all of that, and you will. You know, the system's going to tell you you're still going to get those same eligibility prompts that, this person appears eligible for choice SSBG and A&D waiver. You'll still get all of that. The system will tell you that. But for case managers in the field doing these assessments, again, if you're participating in the choice pilot, I know you've heard these conversations before, that we really want to get away from being focused on eligibility first. Let's focus on a needs-based, person-centered assessment process that helps people in the pilot, and then we really emphasize, what are their informal supports doing? Can we help coordinate that care? Are there community resources that can provide? And kind of checking all those boxes before you ever get to the point of which publicly funded source is going to pay for this care. So it all connects. We have to use the assessment to figure out what those eligibility criteria are, but we really don't want to worry about that until we get to the point of actually doing a service plan. We need, as a system, to become much less eligibility focused. Okay, well, it looks like I don't see any more questions. We'll make sure all these questions get captured along with the recording of the webinar to be posted online, so that you'll be able to come back and review it at any point, and you'll have the whole series eventually. There'll be more webinars, and then the super user trainings will get scheduled shortly. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait, there was one more. Oh, where they posted it will be on the. It's the same page where the case management orientation is. Amy's saying she'll send you a link. Okay. If we don't know if they are eligible, who's going to pay us? Well, you're going to know that they're eligible before you authorize services. This is we're talking assessment now. Service planning and authorization of services happens next. So you don't need to know that from the get-go. Someone is asking, where has this tool been used and how long has it taken to complete? We'll get you a list of the states that use the interRAI.
Internationally.
Yeah, and the countries for that matter. interRAI as an organization provides a whole bunch of different assessment tools. We're using the HC home care tool. They provide a lot of other assessment tools for other populations and other purposes, including MDS tools. And they're used in one form or another in 22 different states and a number of different countries, including Canada and Finland and Australia and a couple others. Right now their big push is in Africa because they have a number of tools that they think help address some of the healthcare crises that are kind of erupting now in some of those nations. So there really are quite an expansive organization, and of course their interest in this is using the data for research purposes to further their own research. It operates out of the University of Michigan. So that's a great plus for them. For us, it means we get a good, solid, evidence-based assessment tool. So, okay, good. Thank you all for joining us today, and this will be the first of many webinars over the next few weeks. We have lots and lots of training with lots and lots of new things. So we ask your patience and your engagement in this process because there's lots to learn on both sides. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.